I'm William O'Rourke. As I look out at the audience, there's almost no one I know here, which is in some ways alarming and in some ways gratifying. And I won't go into the explanation of that, though it would explain everything in the world if I did. Okay, I'm William O'Rourke. My title at this point is Professor Emeritus, meaning I'm retired. I retired for a year and a half. But I founded this graduate creative writing program here at Notre Dame. And the reason I founded it is sitting over there, Michael Collins. That's a long story. I won't go into every detail. But I came here in 1981. So I'm going to give you a little history. We're being digitized, and given that no media or most media is obsolete unless it is digitized, that's why I'm going to give you this history. I came here in '81 and I wanted to found a graduate creative writing program which Notre Dame needed but didn't have. But I came here as an assistant professor, and assistant professors have no power whatsoever. So I had to wait till I got tenure before I'd have some weight to throw around and get something done. What was odd about that is Iowa State wanted to hire me to run their creative writing program, which they had just started a year before. Now, the connection with Michael is, when I was here, I ran into Tom, or T. Carragus Boyle, just at the start of his ascendancy. And I tried to get Michael into the University of Iowa, which at the time was the premier creative writing program. They may or may not still be that. And Boyle had a lot of influence there. So I talked to him and I said, you've got to, get Michael into that program. And Boyle responded saying, but he's so Irish. Anyway, and Michael didn't get in. And on his own...
I turned them down.
Oh yeah, you turned them down.
That's my story.
Fake news. Trump acolyte. Anyway, Boyle figures in this in an odd way, meaning Boyle had the job at USC at the time, and I had been offered the job at USC, and it was like a half offer. The head of the English department said, "You're our second choice. And if our first choice turns us down, will you take the job?" I thought, I'd never been to California. I thought, USC, yeah, why not? And I said, sure, I'll take the job of the first choice. Well, the first choice was T. Carragus Boyle, and he didn't turn them down. Anyway, right, the way this story goes and why it connects to Michael is I was offered, before I took this job, where I wanted to start a creative writing program, I was offered a job at Iowa State because they wanted me to run their creative writing program that they were just starting. And I turned down, have you ever been to Ames, Iowa? Well, then you would know the answer. So I turned them down and took the Notre Dame job instead. And their second choice, the T. Carragus Boyle of Iowa State, was an obscure woman writer by the name of Jane Smiley. And so she got the job, and she ran their program. And she wrote this King Lear and the Cornfields novel that then happened to win the Pulitzer Prize. So everything worked out there in Iowa. But it took me a long time. Notre Dame back then was a different place than it is now. And finally I got tenure, so finally I had some weight to throw around. And Michael, because T. Caracas and Boyle thought he was too Irish, didn't get him into Iowa. And Michael, on his own, without asking me, somehow got into the writing program at the University of Alaska.
Really?
Now that's a very strange choice to make. Have any of you been to Alaska? Anyway, Michael went to Alaska and lasted, I don't think he lasted a semester, and the story I heard is that he had one good suit, and he sold that to a roommate to get, transportation, I don't know, a bus or God knows what, back to South Bend. And he appeared at my door in my office, and I said, okay, I'll take care of this. And I started the graduate creative writing program, which he was one of the first 2 graduates of back in 1991. He and Alan Lindsay, who was in the PhD program. Anyway, that's how the program started, because of Michael Collins, T. Caracas and Boyle, and Jane Smiley. That was the route to getting a graduate creative writing program here at Notre Dame. Okay, I could tell these stories forever, but obviously I shouldn't. But for any of you, and I know at least there's 2 people here who are in the graduate creative writing program, I hope there are more, though I don't see any faculty here from the graduate creative writing program, and I'm glad this is being recorded just so I can put down that fact. Anyway, Michael was one of the most extraordinary students I've ever encountered, and it wasn't just because he had above the horizon genius in writing. He was also, C.P. Snow, who might be a name none of you have ever heard, but he was an English guy, and he had made a big hit with this idea of 2 cultures, and the 2 cultures were STEM, what they call them now, STEM, which is ridiculous. But, mathematicians versus the humanities back in England. Really what that meant was a class difference. Humanities were all these upper crust people who didn't have to earn an income and so studied poetry. And the mathematics people were all working class or whatever, and they weren't in the royalty, and so they had to make their way through merit. But Michael traverses or dances in all 3 cultures, meaning he has this ability of prose, which very few people have. He's a long-distance runner, world class, and he also worked for Bill Gates in Bellingham at Microsoft, and there are a lot of stories attached to that. So he traverses 3 cultures. Anyway, he began to publish. His first book, when it was published in England, was called The Meat Eaters. Here in America, it was called The Man Who Dreamt of Lobsters. There's a long story about that. He wrote a short story that was called that, which doesn't appear in the book under that title. And he wanted that title, and nothing matters except that story was published in Esquire, which had almost a full-page picture of him, which elevated him in the American literary world for a while. Things went south after that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, he finally got back to America with a book called The Keepers of Truth, which I recommend to all of you. That book is set, as they say, in a town that resembles, almost to a T, South Bend, Indiana. we are all more or less here in South Indiana. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It wasn't called the Man Booker Prize back then. It was just called the Booker Prize. Anyway, that notoriety made two things happen. One, the book was published in the United States because of the notoriety of the Booker Prize, and he was, let's say, parted ways from Microsoft, because Microsoft didn't know that he was a writer. And the idea that a corporation like Microsoft would let a real writer into their heart, an asp in their bosom, just terrified Microsoft. Even though he had signed his life away in non-disclosure agreements, nonetheless, they had let a writer into the heart of Microsoft. And Michael knew that they had parted ways because his cards, his little swipe cards, wouldn't open any more doors. So that was it with Microsoft. Bill Gates, who I've heard stories about, at least Bill Gates likes to kill mosquitoes, which is, not a bad thing if you're anti-mosquitoes in this world. Anyway, he's published a lot of books. He has a trilogy that finally came out in America after the Booker Prize short list, Keepers of Truth, which are, I think, really, you should all read them if none of them seem to be available. Well, Lost Souls, that was the last one. And there is a paperback of Midnight in a Perfect Life, which was his last novel before the death of all things seemed. I looked on Amazon today to see if that book was available. There are 3 paperbacks on Amazon that are for sale at $500 a piece. So I suggest you go buy these paperbacks and then alert Amazon that you're willing to sell them for only $200. That's what I would do. Anyway, this book is set in Chicago. You might ask, what does Michael know about Chicago? I mean, he must have run through it, on the way to 100 kilometers somewhere. But no, he's gotten a PhD at University of Illinois at Chicago Circle after he got an MA. Our program was an MA for a few years before we hired Valerie Sayers, who got them, we were able to change it to an MFA after that. So he knows Chicago. And The Death of All Things Seen is a Chicago novel. It's in the tradition of Saul Bellow, Theodore Dreiser, other Midwestern writers, insofar as it's both sociological, realistic, and philosophical. Not a genre that's very popular these days, that mix. One of Michael's books, that one in the paperback, Midnight in a Perfect Life, which I think is a wonderful title, never came out in America. I'll get to how it did come out in America. But that book so alarmed his editor, who had bought out the other novels, that she just wouldn't publish it. It alarmed her in every way, shape, or form. It was an alarming book to her. And I'm of the impression that alarming books are the ones you ought to read. But nonetheless, it was published locally by Corby Books, which I won't go into. And it had, Michael changed the title. And if you can find that edition somewhere, it used to sell in the clearance racks for $1, but I guess it's all gone now.
10 cents.
But it's, if you read it, you can see why it alarmed the young woman editor at the major commercial house. Okay, The Death of All things seen. I'm going to read you just a couple of things of his prose to give you an idea of what's going on here. As I say, this is a Chicago novel. One of the main characters, just a paragraph of description I'm going to read you. He shut the door behind him. He stood amidst his daughter's clothes from years earlier, the rows of imported cashmere cardigans, the Izods in the pastel colors and pop-up collars that were no longer in fashion, along with the obscene number of dresses, shoes, boots, sneakers, and sandals, many in their original boxes, never worn or worn once. In their totality, they suggested a great fraud had been committed in the way Imelda Marcos and her 3,000 pairs of shoes had sparked true moral outrage in a world grown too accustomed to mass graves. Now, it's always been one of my truisms that you only get very large audiences in America if you're telling the culture what it wants to hear. Unfortunately, our culture does not want to hear this sort of thing. So you're not going to get large audiences. Unfortunately, again, it appears that what our culture wants to hear is the speeches of Donald Trump, which is a long way from literature. Let me find it. I did put a marker somewhere. Yeah, it's after this. There's that kind of discussion in this novel, but there's also this kind of thing that happens every other page. And there's really very few, maybe a dozen writers who write in English in America who can do this sort of thing so casually. Here's again a bit of descriptions. They're in a Florida restaurant, a seafood restaurant. Norman was in the process of sprinkling a benediction of crumbling crackers over a bowl of hot chowder. It takes all sorts of things to be able to write a sentence like that. Norman was in the process of sprinkling a benediction of crumbling crackers over a bowl of hot chowder. All of us, I think, have done that. You know, crackers over soup. Only one of us has called it a benediction. Here's Michael.